Labour leadership candidate Jeremy Corbyn had this to say yesterday when he was asked about reinstating Labour's Clause 4, its old pledge on common ownership, which was ditched by Tony Blair.
What we've said in our campaign is that we want our railway system and our post office, and Royal Mail rather, in public ownership. They're natural monopolies. We're looking at the whole question of the energy industry, the excessive profit taking by the Big Six, and the subsidies that we give to the Big Six and the subsidies we put into nuclear cleanups. And we're also looking at municipal development and municipal ownership of electricity generation, diversity of it, a bit like the German model in many ways.
Well, Mr Corbyn later clarified his views on public ownership, saying public control should mean just that, not simply state control, but in the case of the railways, passengers, rail workers and government cooperatively running the railways together. So is renationalising essential services the way forward or a step into the past? Well, I'm joined by political commentator John McTernan and convener of the left-wing think tank, the Reid Foundation, Bob Thompson. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for sparing us the time to speak to us. John, if I could start with you, what do you make of this idea?
I think it's not the craziest idea that Jeremy Corbyn has come up with, but it's a pretty crazy one. Nobody wants to go back to the days when the government owned car plants, owned electricity generation, owned oil companies, owned airlines, owned airports. The days of nationalisation are over because nationalisation failed, and there's no point in trying to build a future out of a past that failed.
Bob Thompson, nobody wants this, do you?
Well, there's a lot of hype and scare stories going on here, trying to buy the Tory press and right-wing Labour spin doctors like John McTernan trying to demonise Jeremy. Jeremy was not saying that we should nationalise everything. But what we should be looking at here is, and there's a lot of this idea that public is bad, private is good. Now, the reality here is that a good deal of our energy and transport services are already publicly owned. Unfortunately, they're owned by foreign countries. I mean, in the railways, we've got here in Scotland, Abellio, owned by the Dutch government, running the railways. We've got Deutschbahn running the railways in England. For example, in energy, EDF, Electricité de France, is owned by the French government. Now, if these governments can run strategic industries efficiently and well, why can't we? What's happened here is everybody knows that the privatisation of the railways has been a disaster for customers and for taxpayers.
John McTernan, what do you say to that? And if you look at the railways, the East Coast Main Line was run very successfully for about 5 years by the government.
Look, I say that railway privatisation has been one of the most successful privatisations. There are far more passengers travelling on the railways.
It's an awful lot of public money, though, doesn't it, John?
Of course it gets a lot of public money, but it uses that public money immensely well. There's new rolling stock, there are new lines, there are new journeys. There's been a massive boost
in the
number of people who are passing.
Taxpayers paying it.
And there's been a massive boost in the number of people who use the railways, and that's been a very good thing. But I don't understand Bob's argument, basically, which is he wants public ownership. So if Abellio or Deutsche Bahn own it and they're public companies, well, why aren't you happy with that? If public ownership is the thing which you fetishise, it shouldn't matter whether it's a German government or a French government or a Dutch government. The point is public money has to be used as well as possible. And we know from the railway franchising that you save billions over the term of a contract by franchising, by competing for them. We don't have money to waste in this country on buying back an industry that's working perfectly well, whether it's energy or whether it's the railways. The future problems of the country are very, very different from this idea of trying to revive the 1940s in the politics of the 1980s. We're facing the challenges of the 21st century.
And Bob Thompson, if I could just say to you, I mean, part of the fact that these companies work very well in the UK, the state-owned foreign companies work very well in the UK, is because there is this level of competition between various different companies, and that's what serves the consumer well.
Absolute nonsense. The franchising and fragmentation has been a disaster. We need an integrated transport industry. All the money that's going in to, for example, like Crossrail in London, 14 billion, and it's all public money. The reality here is that in the last 20 years of privatisation, rail fares, for example, have went up 25% more than inflation. Our customers, rail customers, are paying more for the railway service than anywhere else in Europe. That system of fragmentation of the network rail, different franchises, no coordination, that is all wrong, and it's holding back the economy. I'm not fetishing public ownership as such. I'm looking for what's important. Now, most countries, most civilised countries, do have controls of their strategic industries and services like energy and transport, because that is the basis of a good economy.
And John McTernan, to be fair to Jeremy Corbyn, he wasn't actually saying state control, was he? He was saying more of a cooperative model. And when you look at some cooperatives that we've got in the UK, they tend to be more successful than the private companies like John Lewis.
Oh, look, nobody is suggesting that you can run a capital-intensive industry like the railways or capital-intensive industry like energy the way you run John Lewis. Nobody can give an example. What do you want? To go back to the Meriden motorbike cooperative that Tony Benn put wasted public money in. There's not a good track record of heavy industry and capital-intensive industry being run by cooperatives. And what I don't understand from Bob at all is how on earth he thinks there's going to be any cut in railway ticket prices. He moans about the subsidy to private companies. If you cut the subsidy, if you cut the public investment, you have to increase the rail fares. And there's no logic in this. It's part of an emotional spasm of trying to... We've got to face up to the 21st century problems. Jeremy Corbyn hasn't got a word to say about welfare. He's not got a word to say about immigration. Not got a word to say about public spending.
East Coast Railways handed back £1 billion to the Treasury. East Coast Railways, when they were back in public hands, handed back £1 billion to the Treasury. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. The reality here is we've got a 19th century rail structure. We've got out-of-date, overcrowded trains. Everybody knows it. The reality here is that the last YouGov poll showed that 66% of people in Britain supported renationalisation.
OK, let John McTernan coming. John?
Yeah, look, the thing about this is you have limited amount of public money. Do we actually want to go back to the days when a government minister scrutinised the annual plan, the corporate plan of the railways and had to approve it? We've got a decent system working. It competes, it drives down the prices, it drives up the quality. Scotland's never had better quality rolling stock than today. The amount of money invested in the rail industry, and it is an all-time high. The number of passengers are all-time high, and there are so many bigger things to deal with in the country, like the challenge of ageing, like the challenge of productivity.
John McTernan.
And it's not being touched on by these things.
Final words, Bob Thompson.
The reality here is that everybody listening here knows fine that rail privatisation has been a disaster for everyone, the customer and the taxpayer. And we have to look at other methods of doing it. If the Germans and the Dutch and the French can run successful railways, why can't we?
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I can see you're never going to agree on that one. Bob Thompson there from the Reid Foundation, and John McTernan, political commentator.